I love that the show took me by surprise. I think it is quite possibly it will easily. It's like one of the most gorgeous shows I have ever seen. Not just clothes wise, it's just like, dear God, the scale of this thing. I felt like I was just gobsmacked the entire uh show, and I really dug it. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah. Um, I'm a big, I would say go with me here. I'm a big musical theater nerd. And there is a quote that has always stuck with me. It is from Rent. I roll Rent. There
Oh,
my favorite line from that entire show is the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation.
wow.
And I kept thinking about that probably like 15 times every episode that I was watching this show. And I guess I wanted to know from the two of you if you could tell me if creating a show about creation is more difficult than we expect it to be.
Did you say more difficult or more typical?
Difficult, excuse me. Yes.
Oh. Well, I don't know if I had any expectations about how difficult it would be. In the conversations very early on that Lorenzo and I had about the show, it was important to portray the context that these artists were all in, that life circumstances put them in by no doing of their own.
Mhm.
And also to for us to really think about how are movements defined. They're not necessarily defined in the moment of the actual movement, it's after the movement looking back. So
Mhm.
whether you think of the Impressionists in France or the Harlem Renaissance or the grunge movement, oftentimes it's around music in my life, but the punk rock movement, and in the New Look, it's these designers, all having gone through crucible of World War II and Nazi occupation of Paris, just a specific slice of life of their lives. So in telling that story where the creation emerged, they were creators prior to it, but it distinctly influenced their creativity and their desire to create as a way to hold on to life force. So it's really I guess for me, the answer is I didn't think of it as telling a story about creation in that way. It was more portraying the context in which these artists lived. And then the totality of season one is laying the groundwork for the future of the series, but that out of this dark moment in history and out of this crucible sprang forward a burst of creativity that would last the second half of the 20th century and
Mhm.
span even to today.
Yeah, I think there's one other thing that happened along the way, and it wasn't, I would say there was an unexpected revelation for both of us, which along the way was, oh, there's actually people behind these brands, because
Yeah.
they're so part of our lives, right? You walk
Yeah.
down whatever major city you're in, you're walking down and you're seeing one of those brands after the other.
Yeah.
And so I can say for myself, one of the transformational things about doing the show was I look at fashion differently because I see the person behind the dress.
Mhm.
One of the most interesting things that, and I think when Adam first read an article about Dior, it's where it started, but gradually Coco inserts herself into our consciousness because what's interesting is not only obviously is she was the queen and then she's deposed in a sense by him and then she eventually comes back, right?
Mhm.
But it was actually the thing that was fascinating was she had seen herself as the liberator of women. She'd
Yeah.
gotten, in a simple way, she'd gotten rid of the corset. And so
Mhm.
she hated Dior for putting the corset back on.
Mhm.
And suddenly, when you hear that, you sort of go, oh, wait a second. Like there is this emotional thing beyond, underneath the beauty.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about like going back to the creation thing, like we sort of don't realize that maybe we create and make things as a tool of survival, and we don't really know that we do that until we look back at it.
Yeah.
But then, sort of on what you were saying, Lorenzo, maybe that's a reason why I love talking to costume designers. This is like the most stylish shirt that I have. I have no stylish shirt. I have no style whatsoever, but there's something about it's really fascinating to me to unpack why a person puts on the clothes that they put on that day. But I feel like the new look sort of elevates that because it is, high fashion couture. It has the ability to um I don't know, point us in a new direction if we don't even know that we're doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I think also partly what we're talking about is expression,
Mhm.
self-expression, and the emotional content to that expression. And oftentimes now, because of how inundated we are with brands, we can lose the emotional impact of the creation as a form of self-expression.
Yeah.
Uh, and when you talk about the clothes that we wear or even how we decorate our homes, I mean, it's your home. No one is saying you have to put anything on your wall, let
Yeah.
alone, usually telling you what you put on your wall. But all of these things are moments to express oneself.
Hmm.
And in war, in the Nazi occupation of Paris, that expression is definitely muted,
Yeah.
or in fact is selected for against.
Yes. I'd even go suppressed, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, it's interesting what you're saying because like what I love, one of the things I love about living in LA is you see people wearing the craziest stuff, right? And
Yeah.
and I don't judge it, but I actually go, well, that person looked in the mirror and went,
Like, all right,
two
this is
thumbs
it.
up,
This is
and when you say
it.
about expression, Adam, you know what I mean? And it's like I wore this because I'm feeling safe, that I'm
Hmm.
not standing out, I guess, maybe. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I look fine. Good.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is an it's you wore the Hawaiian shirt. You made a choice. Okay. You felt okay with that.
I think I was just happy that it fit again. That's
Yeah.
all. I was like, yeah, it works.
Yeah.
Awesome. Even though people could only see me from here up today.
I know that feeling.
I want to ask about dropping us into like the beginning of the story in terms of dropping us into what is it, 1943? Um, we don't start at the beginning of the war. We don't. I feel like you drop us in sort of like in the middle of quite literal physical conflict, and then I felt like to a certain degree I was like my heart was racing the whole time because sometimes we get to see violence or action, and I felt like I was just really discombobulated, and I don't think a lot of shows do that. I think a lot of people are just like, here is the beginning of the story, and these are the people, and these are the other people, and here we go. And I guess I wanted to know what it's like to kind of plop us down in the middle of war.
In the middle of war.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if when you are phrasing it that way, I was thinking of why did we choose to do that? Um, and there are specific reasons why, but if anything, the show begins when we first see Dior in 1955, and
Hmm.
then he's lecturing on the same stage where he spoke, where we filmed on the same stage where Dior actually spoke on at the Sorbonne in
Oh my
1955.
God.
But that's where our story begins. And then he's being asked by students. So that's after World War II, for those who are keeping score at home.
Hmm.
Uh, that's after World War II, and he's being questioned by students as to what he did during the war. So it then flashes back, which is where the majority of season one lives in, beginning in 1943. And part of the reason of why we started in 1943 is it allows us to tell the story for Dior of Catherine, of his sister Catherine, who, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but she was a resistance fighter and she's captured by the Gestapo on what was the last train out of Paris before Paris was liberated. So that happens at the end of the first episode. So part of the reason why we start in 1943 is because Catherine is taken at the end of the first episode. She'll end up being tortured, and then she's sent to a work camp. But Catherine is fundamental in understanding Christian Dior's experience. So the desire to start in 43 is really to get Catherine being captured. And in the Chanel story, it's ordering the events that she gets her nephew out of a German prison, only then to be called upon by the Nazis to repay the favor and go on missions for the Nazis. So we're starting well into the war, but for specific reasons to launch the characters' main thrust of their story.
I think also, Adam, these things evolve as you're working on them, but my sense of it is it's also the crucible of war in this case really defined who these people were. So, it tested them, right? And so when you throw them right into the deep end, as we do the audience, you're being tested as to how do you feel about the extremity of experience and emotion, and how does somebody relate to that? So I think that was certainly a benefit about it. And I think that's probably why we were attracted to it too. There was the pragmatics, and there was also just this is where you're going to see the biggest test of these characters.
And, from the audience point of view, as you mentioned, your heart was maybe sometimes racing or feeling tension. That is what we were hoping to elicit, in that what makes, in many ways, this story different than other World War II stories is that not only is it not starting at the beginning of the war, and there's great stories to be told, great meaning, emotionally charged stories to be told, but it also goes past the end of the war. And whereas most World War II stories end with a city or country being liberated, a camp being liberated, prisoners dying, very few stories just continue. And it's almost like picking up the pieces after Paris is liberated. What happens? And it was a mess for quite some time. So those are two distinctions to our storytelling that when I pause to think about it, I can't recall any other stories entering at that kind of moment and then also continuing past the end of the war.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've seen very many things about World War II that deal with the sort of the everything that Coco is like witnessing about people in France who are holding people accountable. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that, really. Maybe I just haven't seen it, but I thought that was such a fascinating thing to show. And I do love that. Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of movies and TV shows with like, and then World War II was over, and that's the end of the story. But it was like, no, there's a whole lot, like the sort of messy um portion before you can even begin to think about picking up the pieces. There's a lot of pathos and nuance in there that I feel like the show really slams into. I can't stop thinking about a lot of, I don't want to say parallels because they're not, there might be differences. Like, so at the beginning, Coco is really established. Dior is, learning how and struggling with creating a name for himself. There's, but the part that really stuck out to me was how Dior is really fighting to find his sister, whereas Coco, um, she's by herself a lot. Her solitude is really rang to me. There's a lot of shots of Juliette Binoche, who maybe she's like the only person in the shot, whereas maybe Dior is surrounded by other young, really excited designers. I'm not really sure if that's a question necessarily, or if that's just an observation. I want to say that I really enjoyed. These two characters don't really interact at all throughout the whole first season. But I like how I kept thinking about one when I was seeing the other one on screen. Is that something that maybe you
That's
guys wanted to make us always think about?
yeah, well, yes, it's incredible to hear you say that, because that's the hope. You know, they both actually knew each other,
Mm-hmm.
and there's scenes in the second season where they will interact more in flashback.
No.
But Dior was actually Chanel's assistant when she was designing costumes for a play written and directed by their mutual friend Jean Cocteau.
Mm-hmm.
And it did not go so well, as Dior was her assistant, um, way before the war. But the feeling of Chanel being an isolated figure moving through her experiences and history, so to speak, is one that is very poignant for us, because fundamentally Chanel, when her mother died and she was 11, was dropped off by her father in a wheelbarrow at a convent and abandoned and orphaned. And her instincts for survival are acutely toned, and she is a survivor. Dior is not a survivor in the same way. And so that feeling of her moving through life as a sole survivor is very accurate. And Dior relying on the kindness not of strangers but of his friends,
Mm-hmm.
who supported him. And there are other moments in Dior's history which are not in the first season, where his friends came to his help prior to World War II, and actually were very concerned about his physical and mental health, and put him
Mm-hmm.
in a hospital to help him recover. But his a very sensitive and gentle soul, which essentially gets destroyed by his success.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Chanel is someone who, her ability to survive, there's just such different people. And so you're feeling and experiencing that is intentional, and sets the table for the future of the series as well.
Okay. I have to say, I love that. I originally thought this was a limited series, and then as I was watching it, it was like I just keep wanting. I got greedy. I was just like, I want more. I want more. It's weird. I watch a lot of fashion documentaries or biographies of a lot of people in fashion, and but we rarely get to see such handsomely, beautifully produced shows in this world. And I guess, I mean, that's again not a question, but I'm just really excited that the show's gonna.
Well, it's one of the things that was important. Lorenzo and I have been friends for a long time, but in
Mhm.
coming together to produce this series, Lorenzo's experience, not only filming in France, for me, there were three very new things, different than the series that I've created and worked on in the past. This is a period series.
Mhm.
It's filmed not in the United States, and it's
Mhm.
based on real people, all three of which are areas where Lorenzo has had experience and great success as a film producer. So him bringing his talent and his patience and his abilities to help us create this world and transport an audience to it, is kind of what I think, a nod to what you're saying,
Mhm.
of you're dropped into a world, and in a television landscape where, yes, there's a lot more money being spent on series, and there's a lot more money being spent on series other than ours, to create worlds. But with the means that we had, it was extremely crucial to us that we create a seamless world, and that we film in Paris. And Lorenzo's experience was invaluable, as a collaborator, to help everyone in the production achieve that.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's one of the interesting things that you have remarked a few times about the look and feel, and Adam put together a stellar crew. Um, you look at and you think of what the DPs did with that, and the important part of it was, I think one of the things that I don't look at TV's better than film or film's better than
Yeah.
TV. They both have something to offer the other. And that was a lot of our conversations, was how do you, in a way, what we try to do so much in feature films, it's not as forward as it is in television, is what is scale? What is that? And how do you achieve that? And so that was our conversations, was like, all right, well, cinematically, let's look at it cinematically. And actually one of the big fights we had with Apple is they wanted to save some money and go to Hungary or Budapest, and we were like, no, you can't achieve what we're trying to achieve there.
It has to be. It has to be Paris.
Had to be Paris, and we understand when they were trying to save money, but the vision of this show, which Adam kept adding to as he was going through the amount of research, more and more demanded us being on location and being able to do some of those shots where you can see all the rooftops, and you can, those are, I'll say, more frequently used in features than in television. But we were telling an epic yarn, I dare say. And so it required some epic approach.
Yeah, and it pays off. It really does. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for taking the time to talk to me. I love the show. And I expect it to pop up in a lot of places. So thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you.
have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Bye.
All right.